Introducing the new Eclihpse logo.
Dude, that's not my logo. What are you talking about?
Yes, it is.
Dude, that's just a p. Yo guys, what's going on? My name is Eclihpse and today I'm going to be showing you guys my 3 favorite decks that I use on a daily basis, and these decks are the decks which have worked out the best for me, and all of these decks are pretty good, and I'm pretty sure you can use all of these decks from Arena 5 and above. So if you're somewhere between there struggling and you're trying to get out maybe to Arena 7 or just anywhere further from where you are at now, I highly recommend you try any of the decks in the videos. A majority of the decks have their flaws, but there is one deck in this video that definitely stands out to me, so if you're interested in learning some new decks or new strategies, hopefully I can inform you guys with that. And without further ado, let's get right into the video. The first deck I will be showing you guys is basically the Chief Path deck, and what can I say, this deck is just pretty good all around. However, unlike the other 2 decks in this video, this one probably has the most flaws, but nonetheless it's still a great deck. And one thing I would like to say right off the bat, if you are not a fan of the Wizard, you can simply switch that with a Musketeer. Honestly, it all depends what type of people you're finding. If you're playing people constantly using like minion hordes, skeleton armies, etc., you should probably run the Wizard, but if you're finding people who just run like the baby dragon and nothing more, then you can probably run the Musketeer. One of the main flaws about this army is that it is very weak to spawners, like very weak. If you encounter a spawner, I highly recommend you get an early push, or you can rest in peace and you might as well just close your iPad, because there is a little chance you will win. As you can see in this raid right here, I got my ass kicked. I'm gonna be honest, I tried to defend, but the elixir cost on this army isn't the cheapest, and constantly trying to counter these small troops is a pain. So if you encounter a spawner, I highly recommend you push the other end. But with that being said, let's just kind of move on to some other flaws. The other main flaw with this army is that there are no defenses, and that's something I usually like to have. In all of my decks, I generally have 1 defense, and this deck has none, so that makes it a bit harder to defend, obviously, but I figured I would just mention that. As far as the pros go, you can build some pretty strong pushes with this deck, considering the P.E.K.K.A is probably like the strongest troop in the game and it can take out a tower in just a few hits. I highly recommend you push with this P.E.K.K.A because it is incredible. Also, if your P.E.K.K.A is not working, then you have a Hog Freeze combo, and we all know how much the Hog Freeze will piss you off if someone does it to you, and when you do it to someone else, it's just that much more rewarding. And just to summarize this deck up, this deck basically has a counter for most cards. However, as I said, spawners are very deadly. Also, one more thing I noticed is that if you make a bad play early on, that can be the game with the deck. Overall, I mean, just play smart. If you learn this deck, you should be climbing trophies with ease. This deck is just so powerful. If you get 1 successful push off, the enemy is pretty much screwed and all you'll have to do is defend. So with that being said, let's move on to the second deck of the video. This right here is the second deck, and right off the bat it looks like a pretty simple deck, and it doesn't look like it can do much, but that's just the complete opposite, because this deck is honestly amazing and it's much better than you would probably think it is. One thing I would like to mention right off the bat is that you do have 2 defenses. You have the Elixir Collector, which is like a tower, and then you have the Inferno Tower, which is obviously the defense. Now, since you have 2 of these, I highly recommend you put the Inferno in the middle, and then you put the Elixir Collector on the opposite tower that the enemy is attacking. In the battle, I kind of screwed up and I put the Elixir Collector next to the tower that was already weak. Do not do that. Always place your collector on the opposite tower so it will stay alive longer. When it comes to this deck, to be honest, I really just defend, and then once I save Elixir, I tend to push with the Hog and Freeze, or if I'm feeling a bit risky, sometimes I'll push with the Hog and Minion Horde and then use a Freeze as well. And if you can get a Hog and Minion Horde combo off, it's pretty much game over. And this deck is kind of slow and it's very independent on the Hog and Freeze combo, so make sure you play it safe, make sure you have patience, don't rush things, just play it slow and you will win. As I already said, this deck is pretty simplistic and it might not appear to be the best, but it's definitely a good deck and it can counter a majority of the attacks performed on it. And again, if you're just wanting to try out new decks, whether it's battling clanmates or trying to raise trophies, this is definitely something you might want to try. But again, it's very independent on the hog and freeze push, so make sure you get that down. And moving on to the final deck of the video, this is my personal favorite deck. This is the deck that I've been trophy pushing with, and this deck right here is just crazy. I can't even describe this deck to you guys. I have been winning so many attacks with this, I can't even explain it to you guys. I highly recommend you try this deck, like 10 out of 10. Highly recommend, no joke. I'd say I've done over 10 battles with this within like the last 24 hours or so, and with this deck I haven't experienced any bad battles, and I'm usually able to defend or win against a majority of decks. I think I've lost to about maybe one person out of like all of the battles I've had with this deck, and I'm just constantly winning. I pushed a couple hundred trophies, and this deck is honestly just really overpowered. Now, one thing you want to do with this deck is combo the Inferno Tower and the Tombstone together. If you put the Tombstone kind of in the back and then the Inferno Tower slightly in front of it, what will happen is the Tombstone will spawn troops behind the Inferno Tower, and then the Inferno Tower can lock onto troops, and then the troops from the Tombstone will distract, and then no troops at all will basically touch your Inferno Tower, because like I said, the Inferno Tower will be roasting troops, then you have the Tombstone distracting. Hopefully that makes sense. I kind of rambled on a bit, but hopefully you get the point. The next card I want to talk about is the Rocket, and the Rocket is hated by a lot of people, so if you're a Rocket hater and you already disliked the video, just hear me out, because trust me, with this deck we won't be rocketing the towers to win. I mean, you could, but I don't recommend that. In this deck, I'll mainly just rocket collectors. If someone places a collector near a tower, you can easily place a rocket on it, and the collector costs 5 and the rocket is 6, so technically you don't profit elixir, but you're also dealing a couple hundred to the tower in the process. So for me personally, I'll just usually rocket collectors. If the enemy has a spawner, I'll rocket that, and overall I just use the rocket to take out collectors and spawners, and that usually works for me. And there's also one other case for the rocket, and if the enemy is basically flooding your side with a whole bunch of troops and you're in full panic mode, just place the rocket down and it can take out a whole horde at once. And honestly, it's a really scumbag move, but as long as no one's touching your tower, I guess it's a win. And one other thing is, some people heavily rely on collectors, so if you take a collector out early on with a rocket, then I guess you can be ruining their whole strategy. And like I said, before any of you rocket haters hop on me calling me out, just, give it a shot. It's not that bad. The rest of this deck is pretty basic. You have the Balloon and Freeze combo, which is pretty much the most overpowered combo in the game. The Balloon does a couple hundred damage per bomb it drops, then they can attack you from the freeze, and overall it's like a pretty scumbag attack. And then after that you have the Valk and Goblins. Valks are actually really good for defense as well as Goblins, and if your Valks and Goblins actually make it to the enemy tower, sometimes they'll just drop a freeze down, because the Goblins with the Valk will actually do a whole bunch of damage to the enemy tower, so that is also another strategy you can do. And one last thing, let's say the tower is just a couple hundred health left and you don't know what to do. Luckily, you have the Rocket. Guys, this has been Eclihpse. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. These are the 3 decks I'm mainly using and that I'm pushing with. I believe you can use all of these decks above Arena 5. So if you're in Arena 5, feel free to try any of these. Or let's say you don't have the Elixir Collector, you can easily substitute that out with any other card of your choice. So again, guys, this has been Eclihpse. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and peace out.